Welcome to Scarritt Bennett Center, where we are located right here at 10027, right here on 18th Avenue South. We have the esteemed pleasure of welcoming the Meharry doctors with us today for Research Matters. I am Reverend Sandrea Tobert, the Executive Director at Scarritt Bennett. You are now welcomed into our space, our virtual space, if you will, as we are indeed talking from the John Owen Gross Rare Book Room today. We have the pleasure of having for our guests today Meharry research doctors by way of our first panelist, Dr. Jennifer Erves. We have Dr. Jermaine Davis, and we have Dr. Leah Alexander. It is indeed our pleasure to welcome you this afternoon for talk, if you will, this afternoon, a conversation around research matters. Why research matters? What does research have to do with your health care? And what does it matter by way of justice and the health of justice and justice as it relates to your health and why research matters? So we welcome you into our virtual space, into our living room, into our book room on today. And so, if you will love for our panelists to introduce themselves on today. I have the esteemed pleasure of allowing Dr. Jennifer to introduce herself. Would you please tell us about yourself as well as your background and your research interest and why research is so important?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having us here today. So my name is Dr. Jennifer Erves. I am an assistant professor at Meharry Medical College. My research area is cancer prevention and control. I'm very passionate about this. Many people that we know, including our family members, have been affected by cancer. I particularly focus on increasing HPV vaccination among adolescents. So I've been doing a lot of work to develop strategies to build confidence in parents so that they can make that informed decision to get their children the vaccine. This is very much important. HPV stands for human papillomavirus, and HPV has a major contributor to several cancers, particularly cervical cancer in women, as well as oral cancer in men, which are the two most common cancers and are particularly within men, is on the rise here in the U.S. So HPV vaccination is very important, is a preventive tool that we have that can prevent against cancer. And what we know is that in other countries, for example, in Australia, we see that the vaccine is actually working in lowering cervical cancer rates and is pretty much getting near that end of eliminating cervical cancer. So I'm very passionate about this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next, we will talk a little bit more with you, Dr. Erves, regarding that important research and the statistics around women and it being on the rise with men. And so those that are listening, we want to make sure that you know that you have the opportunity to put any questions that you may have in the chat. And we have someone most certainly watching those to help you engage in the conversation. Because here at Scarritt, we want most certainly to gather you together to engage in conversation as well as to equip you and empower you. So Dr. Jermaine Davis, would you please tell us about your work and who you are and your research interest and your educational background and what your interest is in research and why research is important, particularly your research?
Great. Yes. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. As Reverend Andrea mentioned, I'm Jermaine Davis. And, I guess I've always was interested in science. And as I started to, ask that question, what to do with my life, I considered medicine, but I wasn't really keen on going into the hospitals and clinics and things like that. So I was introduced to research, particularly after college. I did chemical engineering in undergrad. And back then it was basically working in an oil refinery. But as we've kind of evolved over time, we see that there's so many areas of kind of biology and the sciences that overlap. And I decided to do a PhD, particularly in biochemistry, biophysics, because I wanted to understand how cells work. So cells in the body, how they work and how they impact human disease or lead to human diseases such as cancer. So I've, went to graduate school and some postdoctoral training to gain the skills to answer some of those questions. And so I developed my lab to address a couple of questions. One, why do some people develop diseases such as cancer and Alzheimer's? And then particularly for cancer, why do some people develop resistance to it? And so we want to know kind of what happens on a molecular level, kind of inside the cells. And as we've been learning, and with the public, we've been learning about kind of genetic sequencing, particularly in the past year, we know that in humans, these genes can have variants or mutations that can lead to cancer. So we want to study those to understand new ways to kind of develop therapeutics for specific cancers. And so recently I joined forces with Dr. Erves, and I think one of a real interesting area is the many types of research areas that are out there. And you'll hear Dr. Erves and Dr. Alexander's kind of research in social and behavioral sciences and mine in the life sciences. I think research is important because, we're learning a lot about, how to survive and particularly in the current state of affairs, because we've learned a lot about how things work. We learned about how the body works, how it reacts to certain viruses and so forth. So it's really important to understand some of these things because it can lead to new developments and therapies that actually save lives.
Thank you so much for that, your interest in how research plays a part, our genes play a part in how we have the reactions to cancer. So we will be looking to hear more about that very shortly from you. Now we will have Dr. Leah Alexander to come on and most certainly introduce herself, tell us about your background, tell us about why research is important to you and your research interests, why we need research, why it's so important.
Well, first, I just want to say hello and thank you for this opportunity to share today. I am a Nashville native, so that's the first thing I want everybody to know. I am born and raised in Nashville. We seem to be unicorns these days. And currently, I'm the director of the Master of Public Health program at Meharry, and I'm an associate professor. So I say that I'm a community engaged researcher. So that means that I always want to start with community and use my skills and training to sort of advance a research question that comes from community. And so for that reason, when you talk about what my interests are, they seem to sometimes be all over the place. So, right now I have a project with Sisters Network Nashville looking at breast cancer prevention among first-degree relatives of breast cancer survivors. But that question came from Sisters Network Nashville. And so we've partnered to try to answer that question and design programs that'll be specifically for those first degree family members. I also do research in HIV prevention specifically for African American women. Right now we're working with Lamar Owen, developing a survey for students at Lamar Owen. We're also trying to see what African American women think about PrEP, which is a medication that if you're at high risk for HIV, if you take it, it decreases your risk. But doctors don't really talk much to African American women about PrEP. So we're working in that space. And we also have another project that's working with faith leaders around HIV prevention for African American women. So I would say, just talking about my background, I landed in public health a little randomly. I think I started my career. My mother is a scientist, and so I started my career thinking that I wanted to be a scientist, maybe a physician. and got a little sidetracked. I attended Spelman College, got a little sidetracked at Spelman, and somebody on the way out the door said, "What about public health?" I said, "Okay, sounds good." Found a school down the road, UAB, to do my training, and really have loved it ever since. And so I agree with my colleagues, highlighting the importance of research, but because I'm also an educator and training, a new generation of public health practitioners, I would also say that research is very, very important because it brings to life the things that we talk about in the classroom. When I was a student, public health made a lot of sense to me, but it wasn't until I started working on research projects with my mentors that things really began to come to life for me. So that's my spiel, I would say.
Awesome spiel, because I want to, and I'm going to start with you with a couple of follow-ups, if you will, because you said you were doing some work down at Lamont on, a survey group down in Lamont on, and there is a dear president of Lamont on that I have a unique affinity with, Dr. Vernell Ferris is indeed a Fisk graduate. She is indeed my line sister. I am so proud of her.
Oh,
So
okay.
we are so glad for the HBC connection there with Lamont on and the research that's been happening there. You mentioned also Sisters Network. And tell me a little bit more about the first degree relative program that you all
Sure,
are looking at, because it
sure.
is indeed, and how that interfaces. I'll be interested to seeing how you all are interfacing that also, I guess, with Dr. Jen's work and Dr. Jermaine's work. It seems like there is some collaboration that you all probably are having, crossing the line, so to speak, with that, so that everyone can know that genes play an important part of the hereditary mark. That's how, so it's so important to know what Big Mama had, what Auntie had, and how what's in your bloodline and how that affects how you are today. Some people may not, pass on the healthcare identity of the family so much as we pass on some other things, but we need to pass on the importance of passing on your healthcare, your health legacy, of knowing what's going on in your family and how that is indeed important to know how that traces back throughout the lines.
Sure. So with the Sisters Network program, again, like I said, it really came from the membership. So if people aren't familiar with Sisters Network, it is a support group specifically for African American breast cancer survivors. And so one of the things that sort of happens with Sisters Network, and I, saw this certainly before the pandemic and, still see it now, they have wonderful initiatives and wonderful events around survivorship and education. And so there are a lot of first degree relatives and others that attend their events and who are engaged in their activities. And so our question sort of started with, what are the experiences of people who are closely related to a survivor? So that's typically like a mother, sister, daughter. And how are they processing their possible increased risk for breast cancer? Right. So are they thinking about it? Also, we wanted to know, what was your experience like when you found out that your close family member was diagnosed with cancer? Do how was that process for you? And so we did a series of focus groups with close degree relatives. And so, of course, we found, that women were devastated for their family members and wanted to think about ways that they could be more supportive of their family member, but also they had concern about themselves, but trying to find that balance of wanting to be there for your family member, of course, but then also processing what it might mean for you to be at increased risk. So now let me say this, just because you're closely related to a woman that's been diagnosed with cancer, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be at increased risk. So then the next question was, if we're thinking about all these technological advances, what do women think about genetic testing to sort of get an estimation of your breast cancer risk. And so we ask questions, around that to try to, see if women would even be, interested in testing, wanting to know more. What does it mean to ask that question and get that answer? So we found with a lot of the women that participated, one, that some women just didn't want to know, just don't want to know. There was certainly concern about how much things cost. Is it feasible for me to, want to get tested, to try to understand what these genes mean? And then the other part of our study, and I'll stop rambling because I can just go on and on, but the last part of our study was to understand lifestyle choices. So, did you recognize lifestyle choices in your family member, and have you made changes in your choices based on the knowledge that you have now? So we're hopeful to, eventually get to the point where we can design an intervention specifically for family members.
Oh, wow. And have you found, Dr. Davis, that the gene pooling research has been effective even in letting individuals know? Are they still shying away from research when you say, I need to track your genes? Or are people shying away from giving that family history and understanding the importance of genetic tracing?
Yeah, that's a complex issue on different levels. One, because of trust and information. So not a lot of people know about the benefits of genetic testing, and then what's going to happen with that information. And so, as Dr. Alexander mentioned, there's a lot of things that come with cancer survivorship. And one of the things that the research that I hope to contribute and influence communities is understanding, even though women of all races develop breast cancer at similar rates, Black women have the highest mortality rate. And we want to understand why. And we know it's a complex interplay between genetics and environment. So if we understand the genes that are involved, can we predict those people who will develop cancer? And as Dr. Alexander mentioned, some people want to know this information because they can adjust their lifestyle. And some people don't want to know this information. But we want to have this type of information because, as she mentioned, basically two people can have a genetic variant, a very similar genetic variant, but we don't know which one will, one may develop cancer, one may not. But we do have the tools to address this and try to figure this out. And so some of what my work does is to actually figure that out. And so when you look at what happens in the cell, there are a variety of factors and players involved in human health, right? So we're hearing about mRNA and DNA and proteins now, and these come together to actually help the cell work properly. When you have a variant, so when we have this technology that we can sequence our genome, it can tell us if there is a variant or a different form of the gene that would actually impact how it functions. And if it does that, we want to know if that would lead to human diseases like cancer. So we try to integrate what happens on the fundamental kind of mechanistic level of what happens in the cell, so we can use that information long term to design specific therapeutics. You hear a lot about maybe this precision medicine. So we want to see, okay, if you do have this genetic variant, what therapy is the most effective for you? What course of therapy is effective, and can we monitor that to see, exactly what happens to reduce your risk of developing cancer? And one of the things that I like about my field is I can apply this to almost any human disease. We also do this with Alzheimer's disease, which African Americans are disproportionately affected by as well. So we try to understand kind of the fundamental mechanisms that lead to diseases developing and also progressing, and then hopefully finding ways to treat it. And then we can interact with some of the work that Dr. Alexander does, and even with Dr. Erves, to actually, see how to change this on a societal level.
So Dr. Erves stated that cancer was on the rise in males. Dr. Erves, could you talk about that for a moment, a little bit more? When you made that statement, I was interested in hearing that because we focus a lot on talking about how cancer affects women, particularly breast cancer or HIV or even cervical cancer. How when you say it's on the rise in men, can you speak to that for a moment, please?
So, yes, when I speak about cancer, I'm speaking about those cancers that are caused by HPV, which
Mm-hmm.
is known for the human papillomavirus. So, we have six types of cancers. You have vaginal, anal, vulva, oral, also known as head and neck, and penile cancers. And so, when we think about these cancers, when we first heard about HPV, it was known as a woman's disease, pretty much causing cervical cancer in women. And here over time, what we're seeing is that HPV is a major contributor to head and neck cancer within men, and it's on the rise. So we have the HPV vaccine, which is a preventive tool against these cancers, and it's so important, but yet we still have low rates of uptake among adolescents.
Is it you? Do you see that? Feel that that's low uptake among adolescents because we're pushing HPV vaccinations for adolescents and not necessarily at a later age or a later stage?
So what we're seeing a lot from parents is that parents' perception is they can wait. You know, they commonly associate HPV with a sexually transmitted infection and they perceive their child may be too young or they don't have enough information around the safety of the vaccine. And then it's just the idea of adding another vaccine to the regimen because we know around 11 to 12 um, adolescents are already getting the Tdap and then the meningococcal vaccine. And so essentially, the HPV vaccine is added. We know that there's no side effects from adding additional vaccine to that regimen of vaccines. And it's essentially given early in order to prevent an adolescent from, well, it's given early because you have a better chance of being protected before exposure to the virus. So that's why that vaccine is actually recommended at a young age.
Thank you. Now, you all, Meharry docs have been on the forefront of some cutting edge research all along across the board. People will be surprised at what happens in the back rooms of some rooms that seem like, oh, nothing's going on in there, but yet there is some groundbreaking work that's taking place. There is a new program at Meharry that is in Cook called the this research matters that we're talking about right now is a new segment that's being offered by the Meharry Community Engagement Core. Can you tell us more about it and its purpose? And I'm going to let that be an open-ended for whoever wants to jump in on that right quick.
Sure, I can jump in. So we all work with the Meharry Community Engagement Core. And basically, we're funded to get the community excited about research. So on campus, we particularly focus on supporting researchers who want to have more community involvement in their research. We also focus on educating the community about the type of research that's happening at Meharry and hopefully getting them encouraged and interested in participating. We, know that Meharry has a long-standing history and we feel like we're well trusted in the community. And so we want folks to know that there's research and researchers at Meharry that you can trust. And also we focus on disseminating or sharing our findings. So one thing that we talk about a lot, I think on the research side, there's this statistic that, things that are discovered in labs can take up to 17 years to get to the community, to get to the point where it's actually improving lives. And so one of the things that researchers everywhere really should be concerned with is getting your research out there. But what we're learning is, sometimes we have to make sure that we can share what we're doing with people who may not be in the lab, right? So it's real interesting. I think that you have, all of us here, we're community folks, but then Dr. Davis is a basic scientist and spends his time in the lab. And we're really partnering to try to bridge that language so that we can share what we're doing, share our findings in a way that's, understandable to folks.
Awesome,
And
awesome, awesome. Yes, Dr. Jan, you jumping in.
yeah, I was just going to add to that. So, how research matters kind of came about. We've been working um, a lot trying to identify strategies or ways that we can get this information back to the community. So, I particularly lead that dissemination aim for the Meharry Community Engagement Core. And one of the things was is that we wanted to partner and have different researchers come on board, regardless of their background, whether it's in the lab like Dr. Davis or like me and Dr. Alexander, who are actually in the community working with community members to inform our work, to come on and to actually provide insight on the type of research that's going on at Meharry, along with some of the results that they have been getting throughout the process, whether it's an update on where they are, or even if it's the end findings and actually providing next steps to the community on where that research is going and how they can actually use those results to inform their healthcare. So we're very much excited about this new initiative that we have going because we want the community to know what we're doing. We want to know how their information is being used and how the next steps and what those findings were from them actually participate in the study. And ultimately, we want the community to know, as Dr. Alexander said, long term, we want you to be involved in this process. We want you to inform the health initiatives and the studies that we actually have and we receive the grant money that we receive. So long term, the goal is to have community involvement in our research processes and improve the health outcomes.
So, with getting this community involvement, how can people sign up to be involved in different research that is going on? Is there a listing that people can contact through Meharry? Is there a certain place that they will call to say, "Hey, that I see this listing. This sounds like research that I may be interested in participating in." How does that work?
You want me to take it, Jennifer, or you want to take it?
Sure, we can tag team it. I'll let you start
Okay.
and then I can jump in.
So yeah, one of the things that we're doing that we're super excited about is our research database. And so we are trying to compile a list of individuals who are interested in participating in research studies at Meharry. And how the list works, you share a little bit of information about yourself, what you're interested in, and then we can link you with researchers where we think that you might be a wonderful match for participating in the study. So I think we'll try to make sure that we get posted the link to our website where you can actually sign up for that database. Then there's another initiative that we have on campus called Community Engagement Studios. And so this is for folks who maybe you're not interested in actually participating in a research study just yet. But with the studios, we actually recruit people who are related to a researcher's work, and we all get together on Zoom. When COVID is over, we'll all get together in a room together, but right now we're all together on Zoom. And the community are the experts, and they learn about the research project. And usually the researcher has questions that they need community to answer in order to improve the research project, the research idea, the research grant. So those are two ways specifically that people could participate tomorrow if they wanted to.
Or today. They can like sign up, go on the website and look
Yes, yes,
today and see
yes,
and go
yes,
ahead and see. I think,
yes.
you know, the gene pool, the work that you're doing with Sisters Network, the faith initiative that you have. I think this is and we're doing this on a Sunday. So many people are probably come out through with their virtual worship services or their in-person worship services, and may be in tune to a little bit more that their body is indeed the temple of where the spirit resides, and maybe paying more attention to their bodies. So we most certainly want them to tune in to look going on Meharry's website, especially on the research side, and looking and seeing what research opportunities are available for them to participate in. So we want to make sure that if you have any questions, audience, if you have any questions for the panel here today, you can put them in the chat, and they are here to answer anything that you may have for them. We're monitoring that so that they can answer what you may have concerning any research that may be at Meharry or anywhere else, and that you may have an idea that you say, hey, it seems like there's a thread, a synergy that's going on between women and fibroids. What's going on with that? You know, and I think Meharry also has a fibroid research that's going on now as well. But there seems to be that I need to participate in this. I'm concerned about this. So we want you to make sure that you put in the chat what concerns that you may have or questions that you may have regarding research, as they continue to talk about the importance of research and how significant research is being done by our panel, and how they're helping even to navigate through research the findings and the vaccines and the boosters, and even medicine now for COVID-19, that we started this 2.5 years ago with we don't know about this, and what is this, and how is it affecting him, and how do we have medicine, what's the treatment plan for it, and then what do we do, mask, no mask, do we get a vaccine, what's the can I take a Tylenol, can I take ibuprofen, can I take aspirin, and so these kind of things also come up through an area of research. It's something as basic as that. And how could they come up with a vaccine so quickly and a booster so quickly? Well, that's because, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were already research being done in the back room already with some dedicated researchers that already were tracking what would happen if these so-called genes got together, and so-called pathogens got together. They were already researching them ahead of the curve. And so that's what researchers do. I know we kind of steer children into education. We steer them into athletics. We steer them into being doctors and lawyers. Maybe you need to steer your children into being researchers and making an impact on really what's going on in society. And so therefore, I want you to talk about this, about research and the importance of research, and how we can navigate even during this difficult time and this different time of the pandemic, and how research has been important regarding that. While people are dropping in the chat their questions for us to look at and to answer.
I do want to follow up with that on a couple of different levels. One, getting involved in the community is just a natural thing to do, because it helps us understand the needs of the community. But what's really great about Meharry is that not only do we address these concerns in the community engagement way, Meharry is also responsible for training the next generations of physicians and scientists. So indirectly, being in the community, hopefully we will stimulate the interests of some of the younger generation to pursue research, especially when they see people that look like them addressing the questions and problems in biology that are of interest to them. And so we have a lot of summer programs and research opportunities for undergraduates. And we obviously train physicians and master's level students as well as graduate students. So we kind of create this environment where we contribute to many different levels, and you see the differences in the types of research that's being done, whether it's me working in the lab, or Dr. Erves and Dr. Alexander in the community. We have several researchers doing different types of cancers, and we look for, particularly on some of the basic sciences areas, is how to train the next generation of scientists to help address some of these questions that we don't have answers to. And then how do we come together and understand it on a deeper level? So the more we integrate different fields, the more questions we can answer, which may even lead to even more questions. But we really overall seek to improve human health, and particularly human health equity, right? So how do we tackle these big questions that really reduce some of the health disparities that we see across a lot of diseases?
If the panel, someone may be about to finish answering the question that I asked about research regarding COVID-19, then I'll come to one of the questions that has been posed on our Facebook feed. So if someone else was going to jump in, thank you, Dr. Jamie.
So yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Can you repeat the question around COVID?
Oh, repeat the question. The question was regarding what about research now and how important it has been with the pandemic and the current vaccines, the current research that has already taken place. How important has research matters regarding COVID-19?
So I think I will start off by saying that research has been a vital tool to address the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was because we had the infrastructure in place and just several years of research of improving technology, understanding of the virus. Of course, there was a pandemic before in 2000 with SARS, and another in 2012, I believe, if I'm right, Dr. Davis, with the MERS virus, which are very similar to the current virus that we have. And so because those prior well, I don't want to say epidemics because they were quite small, they were contained in a timely manner. Because those had happened, we had the framework in place to begin fighting against the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of the vaccine, we use vaccines daily. We start when we're babies. We get several vaccines at birth, and then we have others throughout life that we have. And just understanding that technology, all of that was in place. And of course, through years of research, we know that vaccines are safe, they're effective. So it was fairly easy to turn and to develop a vaccine in a timely manner. Dr. Davis works or knows a lot about this, so I want to turn it over to him in case he wants to add anything to that when it comes to vaccine development and how it was important during this time.
Yes, I will add. We've had so many cases of coronavirus, and there've been so many people who've died from it. And if we didn't have a vaccine, it would be even worse. And so we've really, saved a lot of lives because of the development, and there are different parts to the vaccine development. We realized people have never heard of mRNA, so they were a bit skeptic about it. But mRNA is a well-established molecule within the cell. We have it. We understand the process of how genes actually are translated into this message, which is the RNA, and this RNA makes the protein. And this protein is what gives us our eye color, hair color, and so forth. So it's an essential part of biology. And so we've learned this, we've known this for a long time. We've seen viruses before, so we know how they behave. And so with the vaccine development, we had to figure out a fast way to save lives. It was an urgent matter. So we had to look at the FDA process and say, how can we streamline this without cutting any corners so that we can really save the lives of people? And so instead of doing the phases one by one, where they start with phase 1 and finish it and then go to phase 2, a lot of these were done simultaneously. And also the government gave money so that when it was ready, it can actually be produced with no problems. So we had to really look at the process of designing and development and figure out what are the best ways to save lives. And so this enabled, researchers around the world to contribute to this in many different areas. And that led us to a couple of different vaccines. And so with the emergence of the variants, because it's still spreading, we're still not out of the clear. So there's still more research that needs to be done. But we know basically you can look at this as a race for survival. The virus is trying to survive just as we are trying to survive. Luckily, we have an upper hand, but the virus works fast. In order for it to work, it needs to infect people or animals. So the only way to stop it is either the people not come into contact with each other, or the vaccines. And so we've learned a lot about how these viruses function and behave. And now we're in the process of trying to just save as many lives as possible so that as it continues, hopefully the number of people that are suffering from it is reduced. So research is basically why we're here today, because we've learned a lot about, how viruses and bacteria function. And I've always loved learning about this. And particularly if you think about how we evolved as people, we used to get sick of maybe hundreds of 100 years ago, we would get sick before we had refrigeration, right? So we would have meat and we would have to cure it with salt, but sometimes that meat would become contaminated. But when we got refrigeration, those numbers went down, right? So we've learned a lot about how these things work and we've adapted to it. And so that's kind of where we are now. We're trying to adapt to getting rid of this virus as well as saving lives. And that's just a combination of understanding, research, and pushing it forward.
And to kind of add to that, I think this is where it's important to understand that with research, it's constantly changing. And so what a lot of us ask for is grace throughout this process because this is new. It's a new pandemic. Everyone is working. Researchers are working. So for example, in the beginning, it was, we may not need masks, but now they're saying, yes, wear your mask and you need a KN95 or N95 mask. Well, through research, we see that this is the best tool or the most effective way to prevent against COVID-19. So just remember that as you constantly hear updates, it's because researchers are constantly working. They are constantly trying to figure out what's the best way to protect the public. And so as we learn more, our job is to get that information out to the public. So I just wanted to kind of summarize with that too, because I think a lot of questions have stemmed around why are things constantly changing? It's because we're constantly working. We're constantly trying to figure out the best way to protect the public.
And I think the only thing I would add to that is the communication piece, right? So people are even doing research on the best ways to communicate this, quickly changing landscape as it relates to, what it is we're supposed to do. And, just to kind of share a personal story, I think for me, just benefiting from this partnership with Dr. Davis and Dr. Erves, learning more about how the vaccine was developed, and even learning that there were people who looked like me, involved in the development of the vaccines. For me, that made me feel better, right? Even with everything I know, and I'm believing vaccines, but this one, everybody, the elephant in the room was, where did this come from? It was so quick. But to have the benefit of hearing, well, it wasn't that quick. People have been working in this space and doing this work, and there are people that look like us in the room making decisions about, how the vaccines will work, how they'll be rolled out, thinking about how to communicate. So I think that has been beneficial too.
So I see a question in the chat box that asks, how have we involved community members in our research? So, for example, I will give one right now. Dr. Davis and I are developing a marketing campaign that we hope to launch here in Davidson County mid February to inform individuals about the COVID-19 vaccine. And so, what we have done is that we have developed messages that will be implemented in this campaign, and we wanted community members to actually provide input on this messaging. Are we answering your concerns the way that they need to be answered? Do you understand what we're actually relaying in those messages? Because we know that there's a lot of mis and disinformation that's floating around COVID-19 and the vaccine. So not only have we done interviews with community members to kind of get input on the messaging, we formed a community advisory board where we meet often so that they can see what we're doing, what we're planning, proposing, getting their feedback and input on the process, the messaging, the next steps for this marketing campaign. And we even have them involved to the point that we want them to help implement this work, to help promote this work. They were engaged with helping to write the grant, providing their input on how this particular process should work in terms of developing and implementing this campaign. And they will be a part of disseminating. And what that means is that when we get the results, if we increase vaccination rates by providing accurate ongoing information, we want them to help us get the information out to the public to say, hey, this worked. This is the grant we proposed, this worked. And even it could be us coming back on here on Research Matters and sharing what that process looked like and how we disseminated those results to the community and through here to you. So ultimately, community members have been vital, and I think in all of our projects, and this is just one example where we have currently engaged community members to do some work that we have going right now.
And now,
go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback a little bit, and say for folks who are committed to doing research kind of in partnership with community, then you build time and space to have your community advisory boards, to build relationships with people that have lived experiences with some of these issues that we're talking about. And I'm saying that because I wanted us to segue, and Reverend Sade, you might have been getting ready to do this, but segue, because I think we had a really wonderful question in the chat about trust, right? And so how do we sort of enhance and build trust, among folks, with particularly research with children and, young adults. And so I don't know who said this quote, Dr. Erves, you may remember, but if you want to be, if you want to be trusted, you have to behave, in a manner where people deem you trustworthy, right? And so, when you take the time to build relationship with community, that is how you begin to establish some of that trust. I mean, I think about, my early research projects when I came to Nashville. Many of those people are like family now, so yes, we're colleagues and we do research, but we're also family.
That was exactly where I was going, because that was such an interesting question that was in the chat. Specifically, they said, what is or can be done to increase the trust of the public to engage in research, especially when we're speaking with our young people, our children, our young adults, that that they've read about the Tuskegee experiment. So now they're a little bit more leery. So how do we engage them in such a way for them to trust that the research is for their benefit and for them to be a part of the research?
To kind of add to what Dr. Alexander was saying, I think the first thing is that we kind of have to talk about, we have to acknowledge what has happened. We cannot act like it didn't happen. We have to recognize that it did. The second thing is we need to talk about things that are in place to actually prevent those things from happening. So, for example, our institutions have what we call institutional review boards. It's where we have researchers, community members who are sitting at the table reviewing these grants and applications to say, hey, either this is an ethical study or you need to revise some of the things that you have put in this application. We have this board in place to help ensure we're carrying out a study that we in hopes to be beneficial, because some studies we may not get the results that we intend to get, and that's how research works, and that's fine. But the ultimate goal is through that process is to make sure individuals are protected when it comes to study participation. The next thing is that not only that, researchers are trained. So we have what we call city training. And through city training, we have to go through and understand how to conduct our research in an ethical manner. And that's to ensure that the community is protected. And we are upheld to these standards, and we're held accountable. And so when it comes to community members, we have developed programs like particularly the Meharry Vanderbilt Community Engaged Research Core, where we have classes for community members to talk about the research processes, how does it work, what are the different methods, how do we sustain research methods, how does the grant process work. We have these classes that are available to the community so that we can start to ease some of the concerns. And not only that, some institutions are offering trainings for researchers on how to engage with community. We recognize across certain fields that's just not known. For example, I call Dr. Davis a unicorn. He may be basic science, but he's very passionate about community. But all basic scientists don't have that training to engage with community. So now we're looking at and trying to offer those trainings to researchers. So I think one step at a time, we're slowly making strides to engage community and make sure we're trained and ready on our end. But also, we ask that community start to, you know, sign up for the database. Let us start giving you some research studies and pick and choose the ones you're most comfortable with. And as you learn the research process, then you can try another study and another study. So I would just say that there are different things in place. We're slowly making strides to get there. It's a work in process, but just have grace and work with us as we start to navigate through how best we can engage the community in the research processes.
One thing I would like to add to what my colleagues have mentioned is, particularly with studies like that, is there are a lot more of us at the table, right? So back then, there were very few minority or what we call underrepresented, but there were very few African Americans or minority scientists and physicians that were at the table that actually started that study. Basically, there were none. But now we have people in key places to prevent those type of things from happening, not only from developing, but putting those policies in place so they don't happen again. So we have kind of overcome that and are monitoring to make sure none of that ever happens again. And that's why it's important that we also train people in different fields, whether it be basic sciences as a community, to actually come together to address these questions that affect populations at risk.
The only thing I think I would add to the conversation, of course, I agree with everything that's been said, but the beauty of this is, researchers, we come to the table. I think we have questions. I'm working with B Cycle and the public library, and we're trying to do a survey. I'm like, oh Lord, y'all are asking me to do a survey. I can ask a million questions about physical activity and all this kind of stuff. But the beauty of what happens, I think sometimes, especially when researchers and community move together, is you see a shift. So the researcher comes to the table with their expertise, but community comes to the table with expertise as well. And so we may be driving, this hustle to get grants and do research and coming up with questions, but sometimes it shifts and community begins to have their own questions, lead their own research, write their own grants, bring resources into their own organizations, because we've tracked together as partners and they've brought their expertise and also learned about the research enterprise. So there are all types of benefits, from students helping basic science researchers get out in the community, change that language a little bit so that folks can really, have a take-home message, but also, development for community organizations as well.
Yes, it seems as if we probably have 5 more minutes in this rich discussion. I have really been enjoying this discussion. Please, the community that are engaged in witnessing this discussion on today, if you have any questions, we want to make sure that you put them in the chat. And this is your opportunity to jump in and ask a researcher questions that you may have about healthcare and research. And we've seen and heard about the research that has been that you all are involved in. How can we see about getting individuals involved in the process and receiving the feedback? I think that was one of the questions that we had earlier, that okay, the community may participate in a research project, but is there any feedback on the research end about what they may be experiencing, or what's the outcome? So how do we receive the outcome of what may have been the research? I think is what the question was.
So it's a couple of things. The first thing is that we have a monthly newsletter that goes out to the community. So if you go onto our website and sign up for research studies, or we can put the email within the chat, you can go in and say you want to sign up for the newsletter. And we're also, it's not up and running yet, but we're in the process of putting a page up on the Meharry Community Engagement Core site to where you can begin to see the findings from research studies that are happening at Meharry Medical College. So we would love to get that information out to you. And if you have strategies or other ways we can do that, we welcome all input. Again, this is where we want your voice, and we want to hear the strategies that you have so we can incorporate in our work at Meharry.
So there is another question that says, in addition to the community engagement studios, what is a good starting point for community members who want to be involved in research? So they want to know what's the starting point? How do I jump in to being a part of being a participant in the research process?
So as Dr. Alexander has alluded to earlier, we have a database at Meharry where community members who would like to be involved in research, they are more than welcome to provide, as she stated, a little bit of your information. And as studies come about, we send out an email and you let us know if it's something you'd be interested in, and then we sign you up. And so then you will get contacted by the researcher to gain more insight about that particular research study. And as usual, any research study that's offered to you, researchers will go in detail about what that study entails, and you will have to provide informed consent that you understand what that study is being asked of you. And at any point, you're more than welcome to withdraw if you're not comfortable, or if you just want to wait, that's okay too. So we will drop in that email so that you can sign up for that database.
And I just thought about that. That's a great question to sign up for a database. But is there just a general orientation of if I want to be involved in research, here are some steps in which one should take? Does that currently exist, or we have to sign up to make sure that there's a particular research that we want to be involved in, and then there's a specific orientation, or is there a general orientation of this is what I want to know more about the community member that says, I just want to know more about research and what's the research process? Is there like a general orientation process? I know I have 1 minute. My goodness, this has been a rich conversation. This went too fast. Okay, oh my God, because we have
all kind of resources to educate community about research, but sometimes you just want to know that you can reach out to somebody and ask a question. And so I want people to know that they can reach out to me, Dr. all of us, Dr. Davis, Dr. Erves, individually. So we can drop our emails in the chat so that people could reach out to us. Because sometimes, you need to talk to a person to kind of go through what you're thinking and, get more ideas. So that is always a resource. It's just,
yeah, we're always willing to talk about our
yes,
work.
yes.
Yes. And if you
So
ever
we
have
are
any
approachable.
questions,
Yeah.
yeah.
Go
And
ahead.
even if
I
it's
think what
not,
they've been
and
putting
even if
I
it's
think
not,
they've been putting links in the chat, but if there are some personal direct line information that you would like us to put in the chat so that people have a direct access, we'll be glad to do that. If you're giving us permission to go
Yes.
ahead and put your emails in the chat, we will definitely do that. So Dr. Davis, we're putting your Dr. Alexander, Dr. Erves, we're putting your direct emails in the chat so that people have a direct access to you to ask their specific questions that in this moment that we may not have gotten an opportunity to do. But we thank you so much, Dr. Alexander. Thank you so much, Dr. Erves. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for coming on and talking about your new segment regarding Research Matters. It most certainly matters in the African American community and how we can improve our healthcare, because we do know that oftentimes we are disproportionately affected in the area of healthcare in various different ways. We see an uptick in hypertension with us, with cardiovascular disease, with cancer, with fibroids, with all Alzheimer's, we have diabetes, we have so many in every category. It seems that we are disproportionately affected. And so therefore research matters to make sure that medicines, we know what the medicine, how it will affect our community. And we thank you so much for being a part of the discussion today to allow us to get a broader understanding on how we can most certainly be involved in the research that is going on at Meharry, as well as just in general, how research affects us and allows us to be able to have better health care. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion on today from the historic campus of Scarritt Bennett Center, from right here in this historic room of the John Owen Gross Book Room, rare book room. I'm surrounded by all kinds of research. We thought it was apropos for us to be in here today. So we thank you. And at any point in time, we welcome you to Scarritt Bennett Center right here at 10027 18th Avenue South. Welcome to Scarritt Bennett, where most certainly hospitality is justice. Thank you and have a wonderful day.